Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a pretty heavy topic, but one that I think is super important to understand. We're going to be talking about psychotherapy and how it can be used to help people facing terminal illnesses, specifically cancer and AIDS.
Okay.
Now, we're basing this deep dive on an academic text.
Yeah.
And what makes this so fascinating is that we're not talking about typical therapy here,
Right. Yeah.
This is about how those techniques get adapted when time is limited. It's a whole different ballgame. And it's a perspective most of us never really have to think about, thankfully.
Thankfully, right? But it's a really important one to at least consider, you know?
Absolutely. So what's key here?
I think what's really key here is that the focus shifts, instead of just being about trying to extend life, it becomes about making the most of the time that remains.
Right.
And in the text, they actually talk about 4 main approaches, and we're going to be kind of unpacking those.
Okay.
We've got psychodynamic, humanistic, behavioral, and then family therapy. And each one kind of offers a different lens for understanding and coping with terminal illness.
It's like having a whole toolbox for a journey that honestly none of us want to take, but we're all going to face eventually. And the text makes it clear we're talking about patients who might only have weeks or months left to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings a completely different sense of urgency to the whole thing,
Oh, yeah. It's not about years of therapy.
No, not at all.
This is about immediate needs.
Exactly.
So how would you say psychotherapy in this context differs from, more traditional therapy?
Well, it's definitely more focused, for one thing. It's also time limited, as we were just saying. And this is a big one. It's very heavily intertwined with the patient's medical care.
I see. It's not just about talking things out on a couch.
No, not at all. We're really talking about guiding people through massive emotional, social, and even spiritual shifts, all while they're dealing with a terminal illness.
It's heavy stuff for sure. It's easy to kind of fall into the trap of thinking therapy is all about feeling better, being happy, right? But here, the goals are a little bit more complex, or maybe a lot more complex.
Oh, yeah. It's less about chasing happiness, I'd say, and more about finding ways to cope and to connect.
Okay.
Really, the core goals here are things like open communication about the illness, expressing those really tough emotions, finding genuine support when you're facing, the end of life. These are big things.
Yeah.
Plus, therapy can actually act as this bridge between the patient, their loved ones, their doctors, everybody involved.
I like that. It becomes less about fixing a problem and more about creating a space for everyone to kind of navigate this experience together.
Exactly.
Let's start with the first approach you mentioned, the psychodynamic approach.
Okay.
This one seems like it goes really deep.
Yeah, it does.
It's almost like therapy on overdrive.
Yeah.
Am I on the right track there?
You're getting the idea. Yeah, the psychodynamic approach is all about digging into those internal conflicts and defense mechanisms, the stuff we all have going on inside.
Okay, yeah.
But imagine, dying as this ultimate challenge to your sense of self.
To your ego, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can unearth some really, really intense emotions, anxiety, fear, even despair.
Wow.
And if those things aren't addressed, well, it can get pretty complicated.
Yeah, so it's not just about, talking about your feelings. It's about uncovering where those feelings are even coming from.
Exactly.
And what I found really interesting in the text was that it pointed out that the common defenses we use, things like denial or displacement or even regression, these are actually attempts to cope with the stress.
Oh, absolutely.
The overwhelming stress, really.
Yeah.
Of a terminal diagnosis.
They are. It's important to remember these defenses aren't inherently bad. They're actually a way for the mind to protect itself.
Okay.
It's like this natural defense system.
All right.
But the issue is that they can kind of backfire if they become the primary way of coping.
I see.
Think of remember Mr. R from the text? The businessman.
Oh, yeah. Mr. R, constantly angry, trying to control everything, even in the hospital.
Exactly. And it turned out that all that anger was actually masking this deep need for control in a situation where he felt utterly powerless.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So even simple changes like letting him choose when visitors came or giving him more say in his daily schedule, that kind of stuff, it actually helped him.
It helped him
regain some of that sense of agency.
That's fascinating. And that really kind of illustrates the power of this approach, right? It's about uncovering the why behind these behaviors.
Yeah.
And then finding practical ways to address those underlying needs.
Exactly.
And it really makes you realize how much of what we do is driven by things that we're not even consciously aware of.
Oh, absolutely. It's all happening under the surface.
But what about the therapist in all of this? I mean, dealing with death day in and day out,
Yeah.
it's got to take a toll.
Oh, for sure.
Right. The text mentions something called countertransference, which is basically the therapist's own feelings about death kind of influencing the therapy.
That's a crucial point. It's not about judging therapists or anything like that. It's about recognizing that death is this, universal human experience that affects everyone, professionals included. So they need to be aware of their own baggage around death and dying and make sure they're not, projecting their own anxiety onto their patients.
So it's about acknowledging that even the therapist is on their own journey with these big existential questions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about the humanistic approach.
Okay.
This one seems like it's all about finding meaning, even in the face of death.
You're picking up on the key theme here. Yeah, the humanistic approach, it's influenced a lot by existentialism.
Okay.
And it encourages patients to face death directly
Directly.
as a way to actually live a fuller life right now.
So it's not about fighting the inevitable. It's about using that time to really live.
Exactly. To live in a way that aligns with your values.
I see. There was this really powerful moment in the text, I don't know if you remember it, where there was this conversation between a therapist and a patient. The patient's really struggling with their diagnosis. And the therapist just asks them, why? Whose life do you want to live?
Oh.
Right? It felt like this lightning bolt moment.
Yeah.
Like pushing the patient to really examine their choices.
Yeah.
Their priorities.
That's a perfect example of the humanistic approach in action.
It's not about providing the answers or the solutions.
No.
It's about facilitating that self-discovery.
Yeah.
Encouraging them to live authentically, even when they're facing limited time.
Absolutely.
So it's less about finding the meaning of life and more about uncovering what gives your life meaning.
Nicely put.
Okay, so we've explored that kind of deep inner world with the psychodynamic approach and this search for meaning with the humanistic approach.
Right.
Now let's get practical.
Okay, let's get practical.
The behavioral approach.
Yeah.
This one seems like it's all about giving patients tools, tangible tools for coping.
That's a good way to put it. It's about equipping them for the journey.
Right.
The behavioral approach is really focused on teaching coping skills to manage the intense stress, anxiety, depression that so often comes with terminal illness.
Yeah, makes sense.
So we're talking about techniques like relaxation training, things like that.
Okay.
And it's important to note these aren't just like, woo-woo things.
Right.
These techniques have real applications.
So what would be an example of relaxation training?
Well, it involves things like, deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation.
Oh, okay.
Where you kind of tense and release different muscle groups.
Yeah.
Guided imagery, where you use your imagination to kind of create a sense of calm.
Okay. So it's about giving people strategies they can use to manage their anxiety.
Yeah.
The stress.
In the moment.
In the moment, yeah. By learning to regulate those physical and mental states. It can really help them reduce feelings of overwhelm and regain a sense of control.
What I found really helpful in the text was the examples they gave of specific self-statements.
Oh, wow.
These are like phrases, right, that are used in stress inoculation training. Things like, I can develop a plan to handle this, or just take it one step at a time. They sound so simple.
They do, but
I can see how repeating those phrases could actually help shift your mindset.
Absolutely. That's exactly the point.
And make coping feel more manageable.
Right. It's about breaking down those overwhelming situations into smaller, more manageable steps.
And replacing those negative, spiraling thoughts with more empowering ones.
Or realistic ones, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about these individual approaches, but we can't forget about the family.
Oh.
The text made it clear that the ripple effects of a terminal diagnosis, they extend far beyond just the patient, right? Of course, the family approach recognizes that everyone's impacted and everyone copes differently.
Right.
So therapy for the family is about fostering open communication.
Yeah.
Resolving those inevitable conflicts that arise during stressful times.
Yeah.
And creating a space where everyone can support each other through this process.
It makes me think of that story in the text about the elderly woman who was terrified of being eaten by worms after she died.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Right.
That's a very powerful example of how those unexpressed emotions can manifest in these unexpected ways.
It turned out like her fear wasn't really about worms at all. It was about the guilt
Burden.
that she felt she was placing on her family.
Exactly. And family therapy gave her a safe space
To talk about it.
to express those hidden emotions. Yeah.
It allowed for some understanding
Healing.
within the family unit.
Yeah. It highlights how crucial it is to address not just the patient's needs, but the needs of that whole family system.
So it's not just one person going through this.
Yeah. No, not at all.
It's everyone around them.
It's a shared experience, for better or worse.
And it seems like even though we've explored all these pretty intense approaches to psychotherapy,
Yeah.
what's striking is that they all kind of emphasize the importance of connection
Connection, for sure.
and support.
That's a key insight you've drawn from the text.
Whether it's diving deep into the psyche, finding meaning in life's big questions,
Right.
or if learning practical coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Therapy, in this context, seems to be about fostering those things.
It is.
Connection, communication, and support.
During one of life's most challenging experiences. And I think this brings us to a crucial aspect of this work that we need to address.
Okay, what's that?
Understanding the intense emotions that often accompany a terminal illness.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big three: depression, anxiety, and anger. These are the heavy hitters, the realities that people face,
They are.
and understanding them is crucial.
Absolutely.
So help us understand, what do we need to know about these emotions in the context of terminal illness?
Well, the text emphasizes that experiencing these emotions when you're facing a terminal diagnosis, it's completely normal.
Okay, so it's not a sign of weakness.
Not at all.
It's part of the process.
It's about recognizing the source of these emotions and, developing strategies to manage them.
Okay.
Depression, that can stem from, that feeling of losing control. Anxiety, that comes from the physical, social, and existential fears that come with a terminal illness.
Mm-hmm.
And anger, well, that can come from a sense of unfairness.
Right.
Whether it's directed inwards, outwards, or just a general feeling that, life just isn't fair.
It sounds like a whirlwind
It can be.
of difficult feelings to navigate.
It is. And as if all that wasn't enough, the text also points out that these emotions can manifest differently depending on the specific illness.
Okay, so it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of emotional experience.
Not at all. The challenges faced by someone with cancer will be different from those faced by someone with AIDS.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one then. Let's start with cancer.
Okay.
What are some of the unique challenges there, and how does therapy try to address them?
Well, with cancer, you often have this roller coaster of remission and relapse, which creates this unique kind of stress and uncertainty.
It's like constantly being thrown between hope and despair.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly difficult to manage emotionally.
On top of that, there's the stigma that comes with cancer,
Oh, yeah.
which can make it even harder for people to open up to seek support.
It's not just the disease itself.
Right.
It's the emotional and social implications that come with it.
The text actually mentioned 6 hurdles that cancer patients often face
Oh, yes.
when adjusting to their diagnosis. Can you tell us more about those?
Absolutely. They really highlight the complex psychological and emotional aspects of coping with cancer. The first hurdle is managing uncertainty. When your future is uncertain, even simple decisions, like what to eat or what clothes to wear,
It can feel overwhelming.
it can.
Yeah.
So therapists can help patients regain a sense of control by focusing on the choices they can make
In the present moment.
in the present moment,
Yeah.
even if they can't control the bigger picture.
So it's about finding those little pockets of agency in a situation that can feel very much out of your control.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the next hurdle?
The second hurdle is finding meaning.
Finding meaning.
This is a common theme across all terminal illnesses,
Okay.
but it's especially poignant with cancer. People often ask themselves, why me? What's the point of all this?
That's such a heavy question to grapple with, especially when you're facing your own mortality.
It is, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
But therapists can help patients explore their values, their beliefs, their relationships, find ways to connect with something larger than themselves.
So it's not about finding the answer, but about helping them find their own way.
Their own way, exactly, to make sense of their experience.
Okay. What are some of the other hurdles?
Well, the third hurdle is coping with loss of control. Cancer can take away your physical health, your energy, your sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
It can make you feel like a passenger in your own life.
And that's got to be a terrifying feeling.
Absolutely. So therapists can help patients regain a sense of control by focusing on things they can influence.
Things like...
Their attitude, their choices, their self-care.
So it's about empowering them to take an active role.
Even when so much feels out of their hands.
Okay.
The fourth hurdle is managing physical symptoms.
Right, the side effects.
And the side effects. Cancer treatments can be brutal.
Yeah.
The physical toll can be immense.
Yeah.
So therapists can help patients develop coping mechanisms for pain, fatigue, nausea, all those things.
Right, so it's not just about the emotional side of things, but the physical side as well.
Right. The fifth hurdle is maintaining hope.
Hope?
Hope is a powerful force, even in the face of a terminal illness.
I can see that.
It's not about denying reality, but about finding those glimmers of light that keep you going.
So therapists are helping patients identify their sources of hope.
Exactly, whether it's their faith, their family, or, maybe their belief in a cure.
It's about nurturing that flicker of hope.
Even when things feel bleak.
Okay, and what about the last hurdle?
The sixth and final hurdle is preparing for the end of life.
That's a tough one.
It's a difficult conversation to have, but an important one.
Yeah.
Therapists can help patients explore their fears, make decisions about their care, and say goodbye to loved ones.
Wow. Those 6 hurdles really paint a clear picture of the challenges.
They do. They're complex.
And it sounds like therapy can play a crucial role in helping them navigate each step.
Absolutely. And there are different approaches. The text mentioned problem-focused therapy,
Okay.
which helps patients manage specific challenges like pain or side effects. And then there's supportive-expressive therapy,
Okay.
which focuses more on emotional expression.
So it's about finding the right tools for the job, so to speak.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay. Let's shift gears now and talk about AIDS.
Okay.
This feels like a whole other set of challenges,
It is.
especially given the stigma surrounding the illness.
Absolutely.
It's a tough one.
AIDS, at the time of this research, it carried a heavy stigma.
Even greater than cancer.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah.
Due to its transmission routes and, the groups that were most affected,
Right.
it's important to understand that historical context,
Yeah.
Recognize the immense burden, social and emotional, that came with an AIDS diagnosis back then.
And of course, the fact that it was, and in many cases still is, a progressive illness,
Right.
that adds another layer of complexity.
Absolutely.
So how did therapy approach those unique challenges?
Well, therapy often focused on helping patients regain a sense of control.
In a situation where so much felt out of their control.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
This often involved things like planning for the future, making decisions about their care, finding ways to live meaningful lives even in the face of that diagnosis.
So it's about empowering them to make choices,
To take ownership.
even with a difficult prognosis.
Exactly. And cognitive therapy played a key role as well.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, it was used to challenge those negative self-beliefs that often arise from, stigma and illness.
Right.
It wasn't about positive thinking or anything like that.
No.
It was about addressing those deep-seated thoughts and beliefs that can really impact how people see themselves.
And their situation.
And their situation.
So it's about helping them challenge those negative internal narratives.
And replace them with more realistic and empowering ones.
Yeah.
You got it.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
From the nature of psychotherapy in this context to the specific challenges and techniques used with, cancer and AIDS patients.
We have.
And I think what's really striking is that these different approaches, they offer different tools.
Different perspectives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
different perspectives for supporting these patients and their families.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some specific strategies and techniques that therapists use within each of these approaches.
That sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Okay, so we've gotten a good sense of the broad landscape of psychotherapy for terminal illnesses. But now I'm really curious to zoom in on the specifics.
Yeah.
What are some of the tools and techniques that therapists actually use?
That's a great question. And the specifics really depend on which approach is being used.
Right.
Let's start by revisiting the psychodynamic approach.
Okay.
Where the focus is on those deep-seated conflicts and defense mechanisms that can surface when facing death.
Mm-hmm.
One technique they use is called life review, which encourages patients to reflect on their past experiences, their relationships, their accomplishments.
So it's kind of like taking stock of their life's journey.
Exactly.
Helping them to piece together the narrative of their life.
Exactly. By revisiting key moments, both positive and negative,
Mm-hmm.
patients can gain a sense of perspective, address unresolved issues, and even find peace or closure.
Yeah.
They start to see their life as a whole, with all its complexities and triumphs, which can be incredibly powerful in the face of death.
I can see how that could be a deeply meaningful process.
It is.
But what about those like deeper anxieties and fears,
Right.
the ones that might not be so easily expressed?
Mm-hmm.
The text also mentions something called exploration of symbolic language as a psychodynamic technique.
Oh, yeah.
That one sounds kind of intriguing.
It is. This technique involves paying attention to the metaphors, the dreams, the imagery that patients use when they talk about death and dying.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that sometimes those deeper fears and anxieties, they're expressed indirectly through symbols and stories.
So you're saying there's like a deeper meaning hidden in the way people talk about death?
Often, yes.
Almost like their subconscious is trying to communicate through these symbols.
Yeah, you could say that, for example, a patient who keeps dreaming about being lost in a maze,
Yeah.
that might be expressing their fear and confusion about what happens after death.
I see.
Or someone who talks about death as a long sleep
Okay.
might be revealing their desire for rest and peace.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But how does the therapist actually use this information?
Yeah.
Do they try to like interpret the symbols for the patient?
It's not about imposing interpretations,
Yeah.
but about facilitating self-discovery.
Okay.
The therapist might gently guide the patient to explore the meaning of these symbols, asking questions like, what does being lost in a maze feel like to you?
Okay.
Or what comes to mind when you think about death as a long sleep?
So it's more about like holding up a mirror
Yeah.
and letting the patient see themselves more clearly
Exactly.
rather than telling them what their symbols mean.
It's about empowering the patient to make their own connections. Right.
And find their own meaning.
Okay, that's a really insightful look into the psychodynamic approach.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears to the humanistic approach.
Yep.
If the psychodynamic approach is about kind of delving into those depths,
Mm.
the humanistic approach seems more focused on creating a space for acceptance and self-discovery.
You're picking up on a key difference there.
Yeah.
The humanistic approach, it prioritizes active listening, empathy, and unconditional positive regard.
Okay.
It's about creating a safe and supportive environment where patients feel comfortable,
Yeah.
exploring their feelings and values without judgment.
So it's less about analyzing the past,
Yeah.
more about embracing the present.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
One technique used in the humanistic approach is called values clarification.
Values clarification.
This involves helping patients identify what's truly important to them,
Okay.
what brings them joy and meaning, and how they want to spend their remaining time.
So it's not about telling them what should be important.
But helping them uncover what already is important to them.
Precisely by reflecting on their values, patients can make choices that align with their priorities
Yeah.
and live more authentically in the time they have left.
I see.
Another powerful technique is called meaning making,
Meaning making, okay.
which helps patients find a sense of purpose and significance in their experiences,
Okay.
even in the face of death.
Meaning making, that sounds almost like a spiritual quest.
It can feel very personal
Yeah.
and introspective. It's about exploring the bigger picture.
Yeah.
The legacy they want to leave behind, the connections they cherish, the impact they've had on the world.
It's not about finding one right answer.
Right.
It's about helping them create a narrative
Yeah.
that gives their life meaning.
Even as it's coming to an end.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. It sounds like the humanistic approach is really about empowering patients
It is.
to define their own terms
Yeah.
for living and dying.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about affirming their inherent worth and their capacity for growth. Mm-hmm.
Even in the face of difficult circumstances.
Okay, so we've explored the depths of the psyche with the psychodynamic approach.
Yeah.
And this search for meaning with the humanistic approach.
Right.
Now I'm ready to get practical again.
Okay.
The behavioral approach seems like it's all about, giving patients concrete tools for managing those difficult emotions.
Absolutely. The behavioral approach is all about giving patients a sense of agency and control
Okay.
over their experience, especially when so much feels out of their control.
Yeah.
One of the most commonly used techniques is relaxation training.
I've heard that, isn't that about deep breathing and things like that?
That's part of it, yeah. Relaxation training includes techniques like deep breathing exercises,
Okay.
progressive muscle relaxation, where you tense and release different muscle groups,
Yeah.
and guided imagery, where you use your imagination to create a sense of calm and peace.
So it's about giving patients tangible strategies they can use to manage their anxiety
Exactly.
and their stress in the moment. In the moment. Yeah, by learning to regulate those physical and mental states, they can reduce those feelings of overwhelm and regain a sense of control over their bodies and minds.
I like that it's something you can practice
Yeah,
and apply in your daily life,
absolutely.
even outside of therapy.
Yeah.
What other techniques are used in the behavioral approach? The text mentions something called thought stopping, which sounds pretty intense.
It does sound intense, doesn't it? But it's not about suppressing thoughts altogether.
Okay.
It's more about interrupting those negative thought patterns
Okay.
that can spiral into anxiety and depression.
So it's about catching yourself
Yeah,
in those negative loops.
Right.
And actively shifting your thinking.
exactly. Patients are taught to recognize those unhelpful thoughts. Like, I'm not going to get better, or this is all my fault, and replace them with more positive or neutral ones.
I can see how that could be really helpful if you're constantly bombarded with those negative thoughts.
Yeah.
It's easy to get swept away by them.
Right.
But if you can interrupt that pattern,
And choose a different thought.
yeah, it feels like you're taking back some control.
But that's the key idea behind the behavioral approach.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that thoughts have power, but we don't have to be victims of our thoughts. We can choose to think differently.
That's really empowering.
It is.
It's like building a mental muscle
Yeah.
for managing those tough emotions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about techniques for individuals, but what about families?
Right.
We've already touched on how important family therapy is in this context, but I'm curious to know what that looks like in practice.
Yeah.
What are some of the techniques used in family therapy for terminal illness?
That's a great question. And there's some really fascinating techniques used to help families navigate this incredibly challenging time.
Yeah.
One technique that I found particularly interesting is called family sculpting.
Family sculpting, what is that like, making little clay figures of each family member?
Not quite, though. That would be interesting. It's actually a very active and visual technique.
Okay.
Family members are asked to physically position themselves in a way that represents their relationships and dynamics within the family.
Wait, so they're literally acting out their family dynamics?
You could say that it's a way to bring those unspoken dynamics to the surface,
Okay.
making them easier to talk about and potentially shift.
So, for example,
Yeah.
someone who feels ignored or unheard might position themselves far away from the rest of the family.
Exactly. Or someone who feels like they carry the burden of caregiving
Okay.
might position themselves in a way that physically supports the other members.
Wow. I can see how that could be a really powerful and revealing exercise.
It is.
It's almost like creating a living, breathing map of the family system.
Exactly. And because it's so visual
Yeah.
and often nonverbal, it can help people express things that they might not be able to articulate with words.
That makes sense. Sometimes actions speak louder than words,
They do,
especially when you're dealing with difficult emotions.
especially then.
Are there other techniques used in family therapy?
Another technique that's often used is called circular questioning.
Circular questioning. Okay, I'm picturing a family sitting in a circle passing around a talking stick.
It could be done that way.
Okay.
But the key element is the type of questions the therapist asks.
Okay.
These questions are designed to elicit different perspectives and highlight how each family member's behavior affects the others.
So it's less about like solving problems.
Right.
And more about helping them understand the interconnectedness of their experiences.
Exactly. The therapist might ask questions like, when your mom gets angry, what do you do?
Okay.
Or if your dad were to stop going to chemotherapy, how would that make you feel?
I see. So it's about getting everyone to think about how their actions and emotions impact the other members of the family.
Precisely. And that increased awareness can lead to greater understanding, empathy, and more effective communication
Okay.
within the family unit.
This is giving me so much to think about. It's fascinating to see how all these different approaches offer these unique tools and perspectives
Yeah.
for supporting people facing terminal illness.
And it's important to remember that these are just a few examples. You know, therapists tailor their approaches to each individual and families' needs, drawing from a wide range of techniques and strategies.
It's like having a whole toolkit
Yeah.
for navigating this incredibly challenging terrain.
And I imagine it's not always easy for therapists to navigate these complex situations.
Right. You're right. There are a lot of ethical considerations
Oh, yeah.
that come into play when you're working with terminally ill patients.
Absolutely.
It's sensitive territory.
It is.
And therapists have to be incredibly mindful of their role and responsibilities.
Yeah, that makes you wonder how they navigate those tricky waters and ensure they're providing the best possible care for their
So,
patients and families.
we've been unpacking all these different approaches to psychotherapy for terminal illness.
Hmm.
And it's clear that therapists are kind of walking